This episode contains graphic details of a traumatic birth and near-death experience. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org. Welcome to It's Your Story to Tell. I am really excited about this episode. I'm here with a childhood friend, Lindsay, and this is episode 5, where we're going to talk about her story and how she has overcome some really hard things and is using it to help others and make a difference in the lives of children. So Lindsay, I am so thankful that you were willing to come on here and share your story in the hopes that it would give hope to other women who are going through really hard things, especially when it comes to childbirth, child rearing, and now fostering. So thank you so much for joining me.
Of course, I'm so glad to be here with you.
Well, a little background on Lindsay and I. We go way, way back. Like, I think to birth, pretty much. Our parents, our friends, we grew up in the same church. We were homeschooled, and so we got to do a lot of fun field trips and things together. And we also got to travel sometimes as families. So some of my favorite memories are at the beach, where I don't know why, but we would yell Puma, like jumping in the waves. And I'm really not sure where that came from, but it was a good time. And the mountains where we would be rock hopping down the streams and oops, we fell in and we would be soaking wet.
Accidental.
Yes, accidental. And, we have not, due to distance and just life, have not been able to physically be around each other. But thankfully for social media, we're able to stay connected and see what each other's up to. And that can be good and bad, right? You think you know what's going on with someone, and really you just know kind of what they are sharing. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that within your story. But Lindsay, I would love for you to just kind of share where you were at before your health crisis, and just tell us a little bit about that and what happened in your life that really kind of changed everything for you.
So my husband and I met through an online dating site in 2013, and I was working at a private school at the time, a private Christian school in Orlando, and we met and were dating, fell in love, got engaged. We then got married in March of 2014. My poor parents, my brother and I got married 50 days apart.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. That's a lot.
And 50 days later, Zach and I got married. But it was just such a beautiful time for our family, for his family. He was working at a church in St. Petersburg. And so we would have visits every other weekend where I would go there, he would come to Orlando. And then we got married and I moved to St. Petersburg. And we very quickly found ourselves pregnant with our first child. And we're so thrilled. I was 33 when we got married, and then shortly after turned 34. So we weren't desiring to wait too long. We didn't necessarily realize that we would have a honeymoon baby, but we're so thrilled to find that out. And then just due to different circumstances, we ended up moving from the church we were at to Illinois. So I grew up where you and I grew up together in Orlando, Florida, and had lived there my entire life. But then I met this man who I loved, and he got a job in Illinois. So here we go. I'm 30 weeks pregnant, and we moved across the country, far from anything I've ever known, everyone, our families, because his family also lives in Florida. And we are in here in Illinois, which is this teeny tiny little small town of 12,000 people. So again, Orlando, huge, to a town of 12,000. And that's where we were able to have Grayson. That's where he was born, our first child.
Wow. So much, I remember you moving and all of those things, but I did not realize like how close it was to you giving birth. And that gives me even a greater appreciation for kind of what you went through and what you're going to share with us, because you're in a small town, which means sometimes, you don't have the major universities or like these big hospitals that are prepared for the types of situations. Your family's not nearby. You're new to the community, and while you're in a church, you're just barely getting started there. Wow, that's just a lot, and that's not even the traumatic of it. Like that's a lot right there to go through, and also so early in your marriage, with so many transitions, and we know how hard going through those things, newly married, having a baby, all of those things, if we aren't careful, can really derail things in our lives because of how hard they really are. So congratulations to you and Zach for, getting through all that. And I guess it's just giving you guys strength for the journey that you didn't even know was coming.
Yeah, God taught us a lot during that time.
Yeah. Anything specific that you remember that really stood out that you were learning in that time?
I think we both grew up in families that were very close knit. We're very close to our parents, to our siblings. And so if we had stayed where we were, it would have been really easy to rely more on our families than each other. But we very quickly found that, we needed to form a stronger bond and really work on strengthening our marriage, because here we were hundreds of miles away. And, for both of us, it was a big step. It took a lot of trial and error. It wasn't something that we just walked naturally into, that, we had to overcome some things. We had to work together, and God had to work in us to really strengthen us. So we definitely fell flat plenty of times. There were times that both of us were like, man, this is hard. How do we make this work? So
yeah. Well, it's so true. That is life. Like, we don't necessarily know how to deal with the things we've never seen before. It's just like a little baby and all the little steps that as they're new, we don't expect them to come out and be walking and running. It's a process. And I think so often, and especially as we become adults, we forget that it is a process and that things don't happen overnight. And so whether it's learning in your marriage with your spouse of how to communicate better, or whether it's going through something so hard that it just takes time, and we need to have that grace and patience for ourselves, or we'll get stuck and we won't be able to move through it. So I could definitely see how God was giving like little opportunities to learn things, and how you didn't even know how you were going to need those.
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about kind of the day that things all began to kind of change.
So, when I was 39 weeks pregnant, of course, this is our first child, so I don't really know, anything, and I'm far away from family. So I'm like constantly calling my mom and my sister, like, okay, is this it? No, it's not. Okay, is this it? So the day we went to the hospital, I was having some pretty regular contractions. It was also the first time in my entire pregnancy that I was sick, like not feeling good. I had like cold symptoms. And so I was calling my mom all day. We're tracking my contractions. I didn't really want to bother Zach because we had already had a false alarm. And so I waited until he got home from work and I was sure what was going on, to tell him that I felt like it was probably time to go get checked. I was also already 2 centimeters dilated at this point. So we went to the hospital, which, like you said, was a smaller town hospital. This hospital in where we lived did not have a birth center, and so we went to like just the next suburb town over, and they got me all hooked up, checked me and everything. And at that point, I was not in active labor, but I had the flu. And so they decided to keep me because I had 102 temperature. And they're like, we need to induce you. And so we started that process.
I was induced with all of my kids because I would not progress. I would get to a certain point and then that was it. And with my first son, Brantley, I was like, I'm doing this, all natural. And went in, my water had broke, like finally, because it was coming up on 24 hours and, you have to go ahead and have the baby. I was on Pitocin trying not to take medicine, and it was just like excruciating. So I know you've got the flu, you're in labor, being induced. Wow.
Because it was earlier than expected. My mom was not there. She was not planning on coming for another couple days. And when we talked on the phone, she said, I'm just going to wait. So you'll have him and then I'll come shortly after he's born since I already have my flight. Okay, great. That sounds awesome. So I continued to progress. I chose an epidural. And that kind of slowed things down a little bit, but after a little while I was progressing. So we're like from the start of things until at this point, probably at like 20 to 30 hours of like being in active or, inactive labor. And they come to me and they said, we want you to have a C-section. It's taking a long time. He's in the birth canal, but you're not progressing. I really felt strongly that I wanted to have him naturally. And so we talked to my doctor and asked if we could wait. And he said yes. And so we chose to. And then they came back probably 12 hours later. And at that point, I was done.
Yeah.
Like, this baby out. I don't care what it takes.
Right.
Neither of us had really slept. We were exhausted. And so they scheduled the C-section. Unfortunately, my doctor was not there. But another doctor in his practice was there and she was going to do it. And So we felt good going in, obviously very excited for Grayson to be born. Um, and so, Zach got all gowned up. I got everything ready. I'm behind the sheet, ready to go. And, um, pretty quickly he was born. And I vividly remember the doctor pulling him out, and he held him up and he said, "Lindsay, you have birthed a toddler."
Yes, I remember. I was like, there's no way that was coming out of you any other way. Like, how much did he weigh? Oh my goodness. Yeah, I bet you were like, I'm glad we went this route now.
So justified, because I had told Zach at the very end, I'm like, he feels so heavy.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Wow. Big baby.
Yes, he was. He was. So they took him, got him cleaned up, all the things, and pretty quickly I started having some pretty intense pain. So I remember them taking Zach over to be with Grayson, and me saying to the anesthesiologist, "Am I supposed to be in this much pain?" And he said, "No, sweetie, we're working on it." And me like trying to get Zach to come back over, like, "I need you." And for some reason, like, he wasn't coming back over. I later realized why. But they pretty quickly put me under anesthesia. What we found out later was that I was beginning to hemorrhage. And so when I had my C-section, there's a condition called a DIC, which basically means you lose all your clotting factors. And so my body wasn't doing its job. And so it was a pretty big scene going on at that point. My husband's standing there, my new husband, with our brand. And they're putting me, under anesthesia, taking me away, telling Zach, we're sure it's going to be fine. We're just going to go do a quick procedure. We'll be with you as soon as possible. So they did a balloon procedure where they tried to reinflate my uterus. They brought me out of surgery. They brought Zach back in with me. At this point, he's still trying to communicate with our families, but not really sure what is exactly going on himself. And he's with me after the first surgery, and he sees some bleeding. He asks the nurse, and she comes over and checks, and it's okay. Then he sees some more bleeding. She comes back and checks, and I was still hemorrhaging. So they rushed me back into surgery and tried something else. That didn't work. So after the second procedure, they actually woke me up enough that I remember that my doctor was there at this point, my OB, and him saying to me, "Lindsay, we cannot get the bleeding stopped. We cannot get it under control. We're going to have to do a hysterectomy." So all of these, I'm laying on the table, all of these doctors and nurses are standing around me. And he's telling me this, and I immediately go into hysterics. Zach said I was just like beside myself. I was crying. I wanted him. I wanted my mom. And I said to the doctor, "That means no more babies." And he said, "Yes, but we need to save your life." So Zach had to call my parents, who were his brand new in-laws, and tell them at this point he didn't know if I was going to make it.
I just got chills and remember back to seeing the post on Facebook that your mom had posted, and I'm gonna get teary about it. Literally, I was in a movie theater with my family reading it. Should it probably be on my phone while I was at the movies, but I'm sure it was a kid movie that I was like, I'm here, but wishing I was somewhere else. And just how scared, I was for you and what you must be going through, and your parents, knowing that they were not there with you and far away, and just how I just started praying, and I know so many people were praying in that moment, and it was really scary to be reading those updates.
Your post is one of the ones that I have reread a couple of different times because it was really special to me. Like you chose to post my friend Lindsay, she's going through this, and you called out to ask people to pray. And it meant so much to me. Like, we hadn't seen each other in a while. And there were people all over who did that. And really, Zach and I both firmly believe that people's prayers are what God heard and answered.
There were a lot of begging and pleading for sure with God in that time. And I know that there were a lot of those, and how important it is that we are vulnerable when we're going through hard things, so that people have the opportunity to come before God on other people's behalf, because we were not made to do these things alone. And you have a family that believes that, and you believe that, but there's a lot of people who have been hurt, or they're alone and they don't feel like they have anyone to turn to. And so that vulnerability piece is so hard, but creating community for ourselves is so important, so that when we are faced with these things, that there's all this army that can come around us and help us.
Absolutely. And we so felt that. It was really comforting to Zach in that time to be able to read through people's posts and, let them know that he was praying, or that they were praying for him. Because behind the scenes, here he is with this brand new child. Thankfully, we had friends that came very quickly once they knew what was going on. My one friend, Abby, had actually come up right before I had the C-section, and decided just to wait until after Grayson was born. So she was there. And so she very quickly stepped in to help Zach care for Grayson so that he could be communicating with the doctors. My aunt and uncle drove from Nashville, which was 3 hours away. So yeah, it was the community that we felt around the world is really what carried us through. So yeah, it was a blessing to have that for both of us. I found out later, as I went back and read through everything, that was part of processing it all for me. But Zach, really, during that time, it was really special to him.
Yeah, because you went through that second surgery, you went through 2 surgeries, and then you're being told you have to have a hysterectomy, but that wasn't where it ended, right?
No, so they, part of the DIC was keeping up with all of the blood that I had lost. So part of the miracle that God worked was, as you know, being a nurse, your body holds 10 units of blood in it at a time. I required 60 during the whole process. So I got new blood 6 times over. The fact that my body did not reject that was huge. I remember talking to somebody that was after everything, like a part of the blood bank, and they remembered getting the call. So that was huge in itself, that they were able to have enough, because if they hadn't, it very quickly could have gone sideways. I also had 5 like really professional doctors who are working on me, who dropped everything in their own personal lives, came in, and then my own personal OB, who was a believer, standing over me, crying out to God, saying, please help me save this girl.
Wow. Ugh. What, I mean, as far as all of the things coming together in this thing, the Lord was really there and orchestrating. You know, there is no way all of those things could have been orchestrated like just accidentally.
My OB had actually worked with a woman who had had a DIC previously. So a lot of the doctors that I've talked to since learn about it. You learn about it in medical school, but it's rare. And so you don't as often see it. And so, but he had another case. So he very quickly figured out what was going on, and knew what to do. And so, I mean, there were, just like you said, so many pieces that led us to that point of God orchestrating all of those things. You can see his hand in it. So well.
Yeah. How long, remind me, you were in the ICU? You didn't get to really like hold Grayson until what point?
So I was in an induced coma for, I believe, like 7 hours. And I held him for the first time, like almost a full 24 hours after he was born. I was the first postpartum mother that they had ever had in intensive care. So they don't normally let children come to intensive care. My nurses did not abide that. They knew that I needed to see him, and so.
And he needed to see you. Yeah, you needed to be together.
And, you know, it's very clear, like, I want my baby, I want my baby. And my doctor said, we have to wait until we take the tube out. And so I started to show him, like, I can breathe on my own. And I was like, Lindsay, you're going to hyperventilate. It's going to be an hour. So, but then when they brought Zach in to see me because he was with Grayson. And I wanted either him or I to be with Grayson. And since I couldn't, I of course wanted him with me, but I really wanted him to be with Grayson. I didn't want anyone else caring for him.
Sacrificing as a mom right from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. He, when they brought Grayson to me, oh my goodness, I just so vividly remember, like holding him for the first time, and how special that was. My nurses actually, because I couldn't be with him all the time, they personally like printed off pictures of him and hung them around my ICU room, so I could see him. And so that was really special. But they brought him in probably just for like 10 or 15 minutes. I couldn't hold him really even. They had to kind of lay him on my side just because my abdomen was so tender from all the surgery I had. And he was so big.
Yeah. Wow. So tell me a little bit, you were in the hospital and, how long? And then, you leave the hospital, you are obviously thankful that you're alive and that you're leaving with this baby, but you're leaving in a situation totally different than what the expectation was as you were going in. And just how did you go through and process that? And, what were the emotions like, and where did you kind of struggle to find yourself where you're at today?
I remember before we left the hospital, my doctor coming to me and saying, Lindsay, you've been through a lot. You also have a family history of depression. I feel like it's really important that you leave on an antidepressant. And I was like, what? I have a brand new baby. I'm alive. Like, I don't need that. I'm totally fine. And my mom and Zach both coming to me and saying, Lindsay, we think you need to do this. And I was adamant that I did not need to. So we left the hospital, went home, obviously still big time in recovery, physically, emotionally. Zach wanted to talk about it. My mom wanted to talk about it, and I was definitely not ready. And that was part of, for them, their journey. They needed to tell me like what they had gone through. But I wasn't at that point ready to process it in that way. I really just wanted to love my baby and be with him. I didn't want to talk about the bad stuff. And so there were some, emotional things going on for them, needing to do that for their emotional well-being, and me not really being ready for that. And so that was difficult. We were brand new to this church. Zach was not asked to come back quickly. He felt in his own self pressure to go back pretty quickly. And I then I was like home from the hospital 2 weeks when I went for my first Sunday. I didn't do anything like teach or anything, but I was there. I had no business doing that. I should have still been home recovering.
Yes. I don't even know how you got yourself dressed. I mean, I had a C-section and I can't imagine. So what you went through, well, you think there was a little bit of avoidance, trying to kind of just deny what happened? Like, let's just move on. And
yeah, I didn't want any part of like the sadness. I didn't want to live in that place. And I even said those words, like, I don't want to talk about that. Like, I just want to be happy. I want to live in a happy place. And that's always been like a thing for me growing up. Like, we're going to church. We could be like in World War III, but you church and it's like, so.
oh, girl, I know. And I remember like in my own, because obviously we were at the same church, and I can picture the pew my family sat in and, just all filing in, looking all like church worthy. And it was a disaster up to the car skidding into the parking lot to get parked because we were running late. But we still were like in row 2 of the church. So I get you.
I remember vividly one time my dad, like, he was in the choir and I was misbehaving, and he like came down from choir loft and I got in trouble. And then he went back up and sang.
Hey, when you got to deal with an unruly kid like you, Lindsay, who was just, I'm sure it was like whispering and passing notes or something,
We were there at church and everybody's like, oh my goodness, how are you? I'm like, I'm great. I'm so great. Not great at all. But I felt like that's what people wanted to hear. They wanted to hear the happy. They wanted to hear the good side of things. They didn't want to hear that like I was devastated, that I was just horrified that I couldn't have any other kids. Here I was having waited, I felt like for so long to find my husband. And then here we are, one child, and then we can't have any more. But I felt like I should be thankful that not only that God saved me, but that we had a child. Because there were so many people, even in my own family, who couldn't have a child. So here I am feeling upset about not being able to have any more. And I'm like, but why? That's not okay. So yeah, there were lots of emotions going on behind the scenes that my husband got to see plenty of. So I feel, poor Zach during that time, because he had married this woman who, was one person. And then I went through this trauma and had a hysterectomy. So I'm processing trauma, as well as like my body is processing like all new hormones and all new balances. And I was a hot mess.
Understandably so. I mean, goodness, and I think it's so interesting. And I don't know, as you're looking back and we think, oh, people don't want to hear the hard parts, the sad parts. I'm curious, do you feel like that's truth, or was that more the expectation that you put on yourself? Or do you really feel like people didn't want to be there with you through those emotions?
I think that there is some truth in it. I think that there are some people that genuinely don't want to hear, standing there, in the hallway on a Sunday morning, my full life trauma story. There are other people who are genuinely asking how I was doing and were genuinely concerned. And so, it was a mixed bag. I think I had learned from a young age, there's a certain way that you act and there's a certain way that you hold yourself. And it's, all generational, coming down from my grandparents to my parents to then us, of, things that we've all learned of how you conduct yourself. And then specifically as a pastor's wife, I felt even more pressure. And now looking back, I'm like, what a opportunity I had to really expose these issues that I could have said, I'm not doing okay, but I am trying to work on it.
Right. But you're doing that now. So, we never want to coulda, shoulda, woulda, it's easy to quarterback after the game's over, right? And so you were doing your best, right? And the more we know, the more we grow, hopefully the better we're able to respond to things. But I think there's two things there that I just wanted to highlight. Is one, it's so important to be aware of who you share your story with, because you're right. There are people who aren't a place that would be safe for you to share that, and that could cause more harm. So as you are getting to a place that you're ready for our audience to, share your story, you want to be careful of who you share that with, because you want to make sure that they're trustworthy, that they are compassionate, that they're not judgmental. There's so many things that you want to kind of check the box before you just start opening yourself up, because that can be more damaging. And then the other thing is this generational thing. And I think that was a struggle for me in my story, is that I wanted everything to look a certain way, to be aligned with the way we presented ourselves. And the problem with that wasn't the reality. And so when I was living basically this lie, there was no one could really like get close to me. I didn't have the connection. There wasn't anybody who was like, what is going on? Like, how can we help you and support you? Because I was protecting myself, I thought, by presenting something. And, that is one of the biggest reasons that I'm doing this, is sharing my story and then having a platform for other people to share theirs, is that we can kind of get rid of some of these shame mindsets that keep us from sharing. But then we can also learn how to be a good community, compassionate to people for their traumas and less judgmental, so that we can help people like break these cycles that aren't healthy for themselves or their family, which then trickles into our community and our world. So how now are you taking all of that you went through, kind of your growth and recognizing like you needing to be honest with your story, and transitioning it into what your ministry really is now?
So we moved from Illinois, and we're back in Florida for close to a year. And then God brought us to where we are now, which is in Missouri. And God used the church that we are at now to really provide a time of healing for us. We were blessed with an amazing community of friends who have really taught me to be my true self. They don't have expectations of who I am or what my house looks like, or what my kids should be. And because of that, we have been able to have a lot of growth in ourselves, a lot of healing. And it's just been really special. We also met a couple who has now become some of our closest friends, who she was the previous children's pastor. That is the job that Zach took. And the reason that she was stepping down was because they were becoming foster parents, and she wanted to be able to stay at home. And we walked that journey with them for close to a year, just watching them learn and grow. And we had really wanted to add to our family. And we thought, this is where God was calling us at this point. And so we started the process of getting licensed to become foster parents. And that's sort of like having a child, in that you're like, okay, let's do it. And then you do it, and it's like, oh, wow, we were not at all ready for this. But it's also been a huge, huge blessing. So we have had a total of, including our current 2 right now, 13 kids come and go from our home, at a variety of different ages, and backgrounds. And God has really used that. I'm a person that likes control. And I like things nice and neat, and I like to know, like I like to have a plan. And fostering, you do not. Like, you get a phone call one day and they're like, hey, can you come get these kids now? Or we're going to bring them to you now. So there's no planning. And God has used that a lot. It's still a struggle. I still want to be in control. I still want to have a plan. but he's teaching me so much, even through the process of adoption, about how his plan is greater than mine. So we have, been super blessed by fostering. It's also the hardest thing we've ever done.
Yeah. Well, that's saying a lot because you've done in how many years? So you got married, had the baby, all this. We're talking now 2013 to 2023, right? So 10 years. You've jam-packed it with a lot of really hard things.
All the things they say could break your marriage apart, we've done.
Yeah, I get that. Brian and I have kind of, we decided to get all of those done kind of in the first 3 years of our marriage as well. Just like, why not? Let's just get it out of the way, see how we're going to manage this. But it's that growth though that has happened over time that has given me the skills to be able to weather each of those things better than I ever would have before. And, that is what is hard to accept, is that our growth does happen in these really hard things. And if we don't experience those things, we're either in denial or we're just not growing, and we're not taking our life and learning and going into new things that God might have for us. And I can see, as hard as all of these things, how God has set you up to help people who have experienced so much trauma in their short period of lives, with these kids that have had rough situations if they're coming from into a home to be fostered. And the skills and the things that you're learning, I would suspect, make you more equipped to be able to kind of nurture and walk alongside them. Do you think that's true?
I think it is. I struggle with saying that about myself. But I do think that God and God alone has used my story to grow me in a way and help me in a way that has helped me with the kids that have come into our home. I firmly believe that not everyone is called to foster. I do think as believers, we're all called to care for the weak, and but that looks like different things. So we have been so blessed with our community that has stood by us during this time. But yes, God has definitely used the things that I've learned to help me pass that over, more compassionate with the kids. Especially, I feel like the older ones that we've had, just talking about trauma that they've been through and how they wouldn't choose that, and thinking back, like, I never would have chosen this for my life. But knowing that, like, I wouldn't go back and change it. I wouldn't want to not experience each and every child that has walked through our doors. And so God had to use my hysterectomy to get us to this place. And even though that is super hard, I'm able to talk with the kids about, like, how that's helped me and grown me, and or just even, like with the younger ones, just loving them more compassionately. So, but I'm also human, and
Of
I need
course.
to bear those scars.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't go away. And there's some days that they are opened up deeper than others. And I think that's another really important thing to remind people who have had trauma and are working towards healing. It's not one and done.
No, we, like, it's so interesting. Grief is such a huge process. And that, there's different things that can kind of pick at those scabs that we have. Um, and it always surprises me. Like, I'll think that I'm doing fine, and then there'll be a commercial, or I'll be invited to a baby shower, or somebody will tell me, like, oh, we're adopting or we're having a baby. And I'm just like, okay, God, we got to revisit this again, because I'm not okay. And I am sad. Um, I do believe that, it's important for me to teach my kids, all of them, um, that it's what we do with those emotions that, really helps us grow. I was just having a talk with our 5-year-old who was having some big feelings. And I said, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be disappointed, but it's how we deal with those things that makes us who we are. And I'm sitting there saying those words to him, knowing that I got frustrated earlier and need to say the same thing to myself.
Well, that's what's the beauty of parenting, and why one of the tracks in the academy that I'm putting together is on parenting, because our triggers in parenting are an opportunity to say, like, okay, what is going on here within me? What insecurity, what feelings, and how do I process that? And I think it's so great that while you're sharing that with your 5-year-old, you have an opportunity when you get it wrong to just repair it with our kids. We don't have to always get it right. In fact, it's more about the ability to repair. Like, if you can get it right 40% of the time, but you can repair the other 60%, it is so powerful, because your kid can recognize, like, okay, my parents aren't perfect. And so when I mess up, like, I have an opportunity to move forward and do something different, versus being shamed when we feel like our parents are perfect, and that, wow, what's wrong with me? I can't get it right. Or they never ask for forgiveness. Like, how powerful is that to model? Our words are one thing, but what we show them is even more important.
Especially these kids that have come from homes where maybe their parents haven't been good role models, where there have been some very traumatic events. It's so special to be able to show them love in a genuine way. And I have to, because of my own trauma and because of different things that we've experienced, work on opening myself up to each child, to loving them in the way that they need to be loved, and really letting God work on my heart to help me give them what they need. Because selfishly, I want to just do things my own way, or, process things my own way. Like, I'm not a touchy-feely person. And some of our kiddos really need that. And so breaking down those walls and giving them what they need is not only healing for them, but it is also good for me, to help see that I'm helping them to help, um, you know, like something that I might not necessarily think that I need, I usually end up needing anyways.
Isn't that the truth? In fact, when I was going through and continuing on, it's like if there's something that I'm just super adamant, like I don't need that, I'm like, okay, I better stop here and get a little bit curious, because there's a reason why I'm so definitive here, and likely there is a wall that I'm putting up as like, this is why I don't need it. It's because I don't want to be vulnerable here. Or there was something from my past that makes it uncomfortable. Our brain, its sole purpose is like keeping us safe. And it thinks things that are uncomfortable or we haven't experienced feel unsafe. And so even if it's to our detriment, it pulls us back into these behaviors to get into our comfort zone. And that's why it's so hard to do this trauma work, because you're literally like fighting with yourself, your brain. It's like, who's going to be the one to be in control of the narrative, and how am I going to choose to respond to this? And I think what you're saying there is so powerful, and something that we consciously get to choose. It's when we are not being conscious and being in the moment and being self-aware, we can't make a choice to do something different, because we're just going to revert back to kind of how we were raised, what's familiar. And so it takes patience and time to develop these new ways of facing circumstances. And you're not always going to get it right, but you can learn from it. And it just takes doing it over and over. You didn't get here overnight. You're not going to get somewhere new. Lindsay, I am just so thankful for what God has done and saving your life and taking you through this and continuing to work through healing. We will not be fully healed until we're in heaven and given a body and a mind and a spirit that doesn't have the things that we struggle with here on earth in our human place. So we're never going to be done with this. And I just feel so honored to watch how you have chosen to go through this. And I know that you've had so much personal growth that God is using. I wanted to tell people, you brought up that it's all of our responsibility to be able to help out those who are in need. And whether that is, it could be single moms, foster kids, abused women, there is somebody for everybody to help and to support and come alongside of. And if you can't do the work yourself, you can give financially, you can send stuff. I know I love when you put out things like, hey, kids need these things, because I can jump on Amazon and ship something, So I want to encourage people to find someone that they can kind of get behind and offer up some sort of support. And then if you are somebody who is doing the work, that you would be brave and share what the needs are, because there are people out there who want to help in that way, but they're not necessarily aware of the need. So I always appreciate that about you. Do you have any other closing remarks or advice of how people can kind of get involved if they're not at a place where they can foster themselves?
One of the biggest things for us has been, like you said, people who have sent us different things for our kids, or just drop by dinner, bring coffee. One of my good friends, every time we've gotten a brand new baby, she just shows up with a cup of coffee. And it's just those little things that carry us through. So I think, we often think I'm going to have to donate hours of my time or hundreds of dollars to invest. And really, it's the little things that mean the most. And so first and foremost praying for people who are doing those things. But finding little ways that you can be there for somebody who is serving, maybe at a crisis pregnancy center, or doing behind the scenes work at church, or anything. They're serving the homeless. Help find a way that you can encourage them, even with a note. I just think that's huge.
Yeah, we all have different gifts, talents, strengths. And when we can put those to work, even if we're not the ones actually doing the work, but it takes so much behind the scenes to pull off the things that you see people doing that are like doing big things. It's not just because of them, it's because of their community. It's because of the compassion that they are given by others that allow them to go and offer that to others. So I think you're so right. Don't dismiss even doing the smallest thing. And when we start trying to integrate this into our life, it's got to be baby steps. You didn't have this all happen in your life overnight. Like, it's one step, and then you look back after all of these years and you see significant change. But from day to day, it's just taking the one small step. So we can all do one thing. And that's my challenge, is that for everybody who's listening, that you find one person and do one small thing to really support them in ministering to other people. And then all of us to keep doing our work so that we can be, we're never healed, but more healed, and because just as hurt people, healed people, heal people. And I hope that if you're listening, you've been encouraged by Lindsay's story, and that you can see that there is hope for you in your story, and that God has a plan, and it doesn't make sense so much of the time. Sometimes we get to see, after years pass, some of the benefits, and sometimes we never get to see the benefit. And that's the hard part, right? Is doing the work when we just want to see everything perfect. So making sure we have the right expectations, I think, is so key.
And loving people on their journey.
Yeah. We can all do that, being more compassionate. And if we're struggling with compassion, it's likely because there's a trauma that you're holding on to that you haven't been able to work through. I know that before I started my work, I was a very judgmental person because I was living in this perfectionist, people-pleasing mentality. And so that was my expectation of everybody else around me. And I would look at people's lives and I'd be like, wow, they're a mess. Like, they're falling apart. And I was just looking at it. But yet, in reality, I needed to look in the mirror because the pictures I posted were not reality of what was going on in my life. And instead of judging them, I needed to kind of look at myself and say, like, okay, Megan, your life is a mess. You said hot mess. It was a hot mess. And stop looking at everybody else and do your work. And so I think it's really important when we are having those feelings and emotions that we really stop looking at others. I know in the Bible, Jesus talks about, like, don't, you're pointing your finger at other people, right? And yet we need to be looking at ourselves. Like, we weren't placed here on this earth to judge. That is the Lord's work when we enter heaven, but we're here to love God and love people. And so thank you for sharing. What a loving thing for you to do for other people who are struggling. So I just appreciate you using your story and letting God continue to take it from even just in these kids' lives and in your local community, but using it on a broader scale. And that's my prayer, is that these stories that are shared will help someone else just keep taking the next step.
Absolutely. Thank you, Megan. I appreciate it.
Well, I love you. I hope you have a great day. And thanks so much for making the time to be with me here today. New podcasts every Friday. Listen and subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. If you're ready to start your own transformation journey, visit meganbabcock.com. This podcast is intended only for educational, inspirational, and entertainment purposes. The purpose of this podcast is not to replace the counsel of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org.